Hello, hello, hello. This is Philip Cargon. This is Tea with the Druid. Welcome to Tea with the Druid 295. It's lovely to see you, and it's lovely to see everybody arriving here from sunny Scotland and chilly Hertfordshire, Silver City in New Mexico, soggy Somerset, Ontario, East Yorkshire, North Germany, Glastonbury, Norway, Central Oregon, Crouch End, all sorts of different places all over the world, exotic places and wonderful places. Okay, so good to see you. I'm here in Mallorca, on the island of Mallorca, having driven down here. And if you saw the image on the thumbnail for this episode, it's a photograph that I took a couple of days ago, looking up into the ceiling of the Sagrada Familia, the Holy Family cathedral, a big, extraordinary Gaudi cathedral in Barcelona. And it has an almost psychedelic sort of quality to it of being sort of part of the sort of mycelial network of things connecting and all the rest of it. Very extraordinary place. So this evening, I have a very special guest that we're going to have a conversation with together. And I'm going to flip things around, and let's do a meditation first to settle ourselves, and then we'll have our conversation. And I can see people are still arriving from all sorts of places, from Canada and California and West Penwith and Plattsburgh, New York, and Gibraltar. Great. Wow. Yes, all over the place. So just like in a physical meeting, if we were in a clearing in the forest, there'd be sort of rustling and moving around, and people finding their spot and dragging little logs up to sit on them and checking whether the soil was dry so that they could sit on them and so on. So that's what's happening now as everybody piles into the circle. But do feel welcome. And if you haven't been to a Tea with a Druid before, basically the format is very simple. It's about 20 to 30 minutes, something like that. And we have a meditation and a conversation. And I wish that everybody could join in that conversation, but the technology means that you have to type in, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram. But if you're Instagram, I'm afraid your comments don't show up in the sort of system that I'm using. So that's unfortunate. But there you go. Let's just start to get settled now. Take these few moments, just as you would in a physical meeting, just to sort of settle down, because our lives tend to be so busy that we even sometimes forget to breathe deeply. So it's helpful to just take in a big deep breath, hold for a second, and then breathe out fully and deeply, just to relax and let go, and maybe even shake a little bit, move ourselves a little bit, just to settle in. And what's really helpful is to use the creative powers of our imagination to sense ourselves being seated in a clearing in the forest. That's a particular image that Druids love, because they love forests and they love trees. And they like clearings in the forest because then they get the best of both worlds: the sunshine, the moonshine, the starlight, and at the same time, the lovely warmth and connection with the trees around them and around us. So let's just get comfy in your spot in the circle. There's a little fire burning in the center. You can smell the wood smoke. And you can just feel yourself slowing down. You might like to tune into the earth and just imagine all the sort of worries and tensions of the day just dropping into the earth and feeling the earth and allowing yourself to feel heavy, to feel your weight, to accept the feeling of gravity as something rather pleasant. It's the sort of feeling when you flop on a sofa, you flop and you just enjoy the flop. Just letting the earth hold you, holding you like a mother, like a parent, sitting on their lap, just letting your weight drop down. And you sense all the life in the earth, Mother Earth beneath us, all the life, all the creatures, the millions, the billions of organisms in the soil beneath us, all buzzing with life. Rocks, minerals, crystals, moisture, sand, clay, soil, and all the mycelial connections, all those little fibers connecting up the world of fungi that helps all sorts of nutrients to be shared by the community of the forest and the trees. And allow yourself to feel nourished by the earth, settled by the earth. And also to sense the trees around you now. And I'm going to suggest that we're in a grove of willow trees. It's February, and in some readings of the Ogham calendar, the Druid tree language or Celtic tree oracle, February is devoted to the willow tree, Saille, S-A-I-L-L-E, the willow tree, a tree associated with the goddess, with the feminine, with the mother. And we can feel these lovely willow trees, and willow trees love water, and their roots, we can feel them going deep into the earth, sucking up the water, and you can feel the energy flowing up the roots of the willow trees, up the trunk. And you sense that energy going up the trunks of the trees and going up through your body, through your energy field too. Just breathing in and breathing out. Letting go to this feeling of being held in this circle of willow trees. Opening to the feeling that willow trees bring of gentleness, of care, of kindness, of nurturing. There's something very soothing about willow trees. If you sit under a willow, it's very soothing and lovely. And just home in on a detail now of the way these willows, their branches and leaves are dropping right down to touch the earth. It's as if the willow tree loves the earth. And just focus on, just to either side of you, the way the willow tree leaves and branches are just touching the earth, making that connection with the earth. Big deep breath in, hold for a second, and then breathe out. And finally, you become aware of the sky above you. And you breathe in the energy of the sky. And you can feel the vitality the sky brings to you. And the energy of the sky meets the energy of the earth within the center of your being. And feeling calmed and settled, you might like to become aware now of being seated in the circle. Your companions around you in the circle, people from all over the world of like mind and heart, gathered in this circle. And let's affirm our love for the earth and ask that the earth might be blessed and that all our lives might be blessed, that all life might be blessed. And then with that sense of community and connection, I'd like to slowly open your eyes and become aware of being here in the circle. There are about 250 of us now sitting in the circle. And I'd like to welcome our guest. I'm going to press a button, and here is Lucy. Lucy Jones, hello.
Hello.
How lovely to see you. Now, the last time I saw Lucy was at the Obod Winter Gathering in the Strode Theatre in Streed. And there were a couple of hundred of us there. And forgive me, every so often I have to do this because I've got this long cough that everybody seems to have. A couple of hundred of us there. And Lucy, you gave a fantastic talk for us. And afterwards, it was lovely to see you in the foyer with a big box of books and a long queue of Druids queuing up to buy your book. And I joined the queue and got the book. And I have it here, Matrescence, which came out on the summer solstice. Was that a date deliberately chosen?
No, I don't think it was, but I wish it had. Yeah, I mean, that's lovely. I don't think I even.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? I just noticed yesterday that it was launched on June the 22nd. Perfect, a perfect time to launch a book. So, and took the book home, didn't read it, but gave it to our daughter, Charlie, who is in her early 30s and has a baby who's just a bit over a year old. And she absolutely loved it. And she bought copies for her friends. She's at that age where her friends are starting to have babies too. And for her sister, Sophia, up in Scotland, who has had a baby recently too. And she was reading that, and she said, you know something, this book has switched on my brain. I feel like I've been switched on. It's just fantastic. And she read out a bit of the book, and I'll just if you don't mind, I'll just read a tiny bit. So just here we are. The creativity started to effervesce when my daughter turned 3. I was inspired by her directness, her imaginative urges unsullied by social anxieties or cultural expectations or self-consciousness. I wanted what she had. The house filled with pencils and paints and stickers and impressions and pom-poms and clay and chalk. It was catching. I picked up a paintbrush again, played music for the first time in years. She needed me to make up stories, so I had to learn. I wrote short stories, 1 sentence long. I wrote with my left hand to see what happened. I was ravenous for the world. She needed me to answer questions about space and time, rocks and minerals, evolution and death. Our house filled with encyclopedias from the library. What made space? Why do birds sing at dusk and dawn? Why don't boys wear skirts? What would I be like if I was a book? In times of good health, my brain felt at its most absorbent and flexible. She was my new boss, and she knew exactly how to get me to do the work she required. She taught me how to slow down and pay attention for a start. This first boss, poor thing, had her work cut out. She had to teach us how to do the job, and sometimes it was frustrating for her. Of all the bosses I had worked for, these baby bosses had the most neural activity and connections. You should have seen their whirring, changing, growing brains, 30,000 synapses per square centimetre of brain cortex forming per second, 250,000 nerve cells every minute. And so you go on and you see what Lucy's doing here. What you're doing is you're weaving science, facts from science, which are amazing, with personal experience in a way that can resonate for so many of us. And it captured for me reading that because we've had our little granddaughter living with us for for 7 months recently. How that's exactly observing how a small child is running the show. Really, they burst into our lives. Everything changes in a moment, and they are in this extraordinary way teaching us, if we're open to it, I think, teaching us how to teach them. And what I love watching in our granddaughter is how she will do the same activity over and over again, going in and out of the patio door for the first time 15 times, just negotiating the threshold and so on. And the same thing with our younger grandson up in Scotland too, this incredible intelligence that you're seeing born. So Lucy, your book, I think, is incredibly important. It's one of those books that people buy lots of copies of and give to friends. Why did you write us? Tell us about it.
Thank you, Philip. and it's such a pleasure to be here. You know, I've loved your teas with the Druid for years now, actually. They really got me through lockdown, and after I interviewed you for my previous book, Losing Eden, you know, and attending these really drew me to Druidry. So it's a real honour to be here in this space. Thank you for your really kind words about the book and for reading that passage. I wrote this book to make sense of my experience of becoming a mother. Before my first child was born, I had a very limited idea of care work, and I knew that I always wanted to have children, and my children were much wanted. But I had been brought up with great privilege to be quite focused on kind of work and career and so on, and in the very classic mainstream culture, post-Enlightenment, disembodied, neoliberal ways of being in the world. And I guess I was, you know, typically indoctrinated in individualism and self-reliance and self-sufficiency and a fear of vulnerability. And anyway, so I had my first child, and it just exploded everything that I thought I knew about the world. In my naivety, I hadn't realized how I knew that having a child would be challenging and obviously change my life, but I hadn't realized how skilled care work is and how demanding it is. And I realized that this invisible labor is what, you know, what basically creates our society, but is so hidden and disavowed. And I mean, in brief, I really felt incredibly bewildered in my early motherhood. Pregnancy had been, you know, one of great nausea. Childbirth had been relatively traumatic. I mean, sublime in many ways, but also violent and a shock. The vulnerability of the baby and my vulnerability mentally and physically in that first few months was kind of apocalyptic in like the Greek sense of the world. It felt like it revealed to me something that I hadn't realized, which is that we're so much more entangled and in need of each other and interconnected, interdependent, and often much more vulnerable than our systems make space for or allow for. So my motherhood was quite a kind of ordinary early motherhood. You know, in our society and culture, I think most people mother alone. Often it is the mother is the primary caregiver, although that is changing a little bit. So my husband went back to work after a couple of weeks, and then, you know, for the first time in my adult life, I was very alone. I made friends and I have a wonderful support network, but it was a hard time, and I felt very conscious of the feeling rules around motherhood and the kind of maternal ideals, which I argue in my book are kind of very interestingly oppressive today. There's a kind of imperative of what sociologists call intensive motherhood, and which talks about kind of the very high expectations and standards of parenting. That's not to say that, you know, the problem isn't the needs of children. You know, thanks to child psychology and the work of people like Bowlby and Winnicott, you know, we know a lot more about what children need. But what mothers are facing today is a very isolated experience of caregiving for so many different reasons. And so I was diagnosed with postnatal depression, and I realized, you know, as I started to open up a bit and talk to other women, that many new mothers were really struggling, you know, and stressed, tired, burnt out, but you know, suffering from mental illness and so on. And we have a maternal mental health crisis in our country, and it's similar in the States and some other countries in Europe. And as I started to kind of realize what was going on, I started to become, I think, quite angry that not only were the mothers I was talking to that I started to interview for my book not really thriving, not coping, but they felt so ashamed about it that they were very silent, and there was like a lot of stigma. So I set out to try and render my experience as precisely as possible, which sounds like it, kind of simple and easy, but it wasn't, because I think, writing about motherhood it's very fraught. So this book is quite, it felt quite seditious to write it in some ways, because, I talk about kind of different struggles, and I write in quite graphic detail about birth and so on. And I think there is an imperative for people to not complain about these things. Anyway, the one place that I found something that was really useful, valuable. So I couldn't really find honest depictions of motherhood in language. I found it impossible to find the words to describe something like birth. And I felt that I was undergoing a significant change and process and transformation in myself. My brain felt different. My body felt really different. My sense of self was different. My identity, all my social relations, but something in the core of me felt very altered. And at the same time, I was fortunate that loads of amazing neuroscientists have been studying the parental brain. And in brief, they found that pregnancy renders significant and pronounced changes to the brain, and the brain changes throughout matrescence, which is a word for becoming a mother. And it's not just birthing people or a pregnant woman, men or other parents who have hands-on care, their brains change drastically, anatomically as well, because of course we were all born in collective caregiving networks, so we all have the neural circuitry to look after young children. I'll end on this because there's a lot in this book, and so I'm just trying to give you a précis, but I'll end on this. The other area that I found really generative and really soothing was, because I couldn't find it in the culture, was in the woods, and was in the 14th century cemetery next to my house. And I write about in Matrescence examples of process and change and transformation, and I became obsessed with cocoons and chrysalises, particularly that when a caterpillar is in a cocoon, I had thought that a caterpillar in the cocoon just kind of sprouts its wings and then goes on its merry way, but actually the caterpillar dissolves completely into goo, soup they call it. But some things do remain, and they're called imaginal discs, and they're kind of cells of learning and memory. And I just found that such a helpful metaphor in the face of what I felt that my culture was saying: don't change, get your body back, bounce back culture, get back to work in 9 months, work and pretend you don't have children, keep all the care work stuff really quiet because no one's interested in it. But when I looked around at these chrysalises, these slime molds that I became obsessed with, the life cycles of sea squirts, even things like volcanoes, and it was a deeply consoling way of imagining that this matrescence, which we now know is as significant as adolescence, was natural and was part of being alive. So this theme of macroecology is woven through the book.
That's fantastic, because that process of transformation is so interesting, isn't it? Because I know you did a podcast the other day for Motherkind, and I'll put the link up for people. It's a great interview with you, and you talk about how you looked at bounce back, as this concept that mums would, you've bounced back quickly, and and wanting to bounce back. and when you dive into it, you see that it comes from after, you bounce back after a setback. Oh, so having a baby is just like a setback and you'll bounce back from it. Whereas in fact, the invitation is, like this very graphic image of the goo, is just to dissolve completely and to become something different, which is what's happening in adolescence too, as it were, when the identity changes so radically and dramatically. And I think one of the great things about your book, and I think that's one of the reasons it's so important, is because you're not just focusing on the experience of motherhood or your experience of motherhood with some insights from neuroscience. You're actually then kind of broadening out to take in society and what this means for all of us and the way the world is going and the way the world could go if we really honored motherhood in the way that we should. And the fact that we're in denial in a way, because it's rather ironic, isn't it, that it's precisely now when as mums, particularly privileged mums, have all the apps they need. They've got apps, they've got white noise machines to help the baby sleep, and video recorders so you can be in another room and see. So you've got all help, and yet because it's coming out of this individualistic culture, it's flying in the face of nature, if you like, which is saying for in evolutionary time, children are brought up within a matrix, within a community, and this idea that our brains are separated. I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting things, isn't it? That we're actually, our consciousness isn't kind of locked inside our skulls, but it's actually totally relational and dependent upon relationships and upon others. And you mentioned just then how fathers' brains change too, and how our daughter was talking about how there's some research, I think, on grandmothers. I don't know whether it's brains or whether it's certainly their sort of oxytocin release and so on with birth. So in a way, the book is not only sort of recording your experiences, but it's a call. It's a sort of clarion call to do things differently, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it kind of it gets more political, I suppose, as the book continues. And yeah, I think that looking at matrescence and looking at natality, like we've all been born and we've all experienced that entanglement, which, by the way, is, I think, made really vivid by some relatively new science about microchimerism, that fetal cells remain in the mother's body after the baby is born. So you have this kind of cellular entanglement where...
For how long?
Forever.
Oh, really?
That is the conclusion that scientists have come to. So they're found in multiple organs: brains, lung, breast tissue, liver, all over the place. And they don't yet know exactly why. So it could be just a byproduct, neutral. It could be actually harmful, possibly, because they have been found at sites of disease. An evolutionary biologist I interviewed for my book, called Amy Body, suggested that they could well be doing something like helping with hormonal releases for attachment, the oxytocin in the brain. They could be in breast tissue to help with lactation and so on. And so, I mean, that was very much my experience. I felt very overtaken after I thought, my body was a pot or a box, and that when my daughter was born, I would go back to my individual self. But instead I felt, almost like a zombie, or kind of very preoccupied, very obsessed with her, which of course is, attachment. But, the cellular thing is really interesting. But I guess the reason I mention that is that I think for a long time in our culture, and you see this a lot in academia, motherhood, parenthood, childhood has been very kind of ignored and kind of seen as quite kind of unfashionable. But I think there is great generative possibilities in shining a light on these, the experience of birth. It's like, philosophy is meant to tell us how to die. I think that's it, isn't it? Or ways to die. I can't remember what the phrase, but our Western culture and literature has barely thought about birth, and what it means to be born, and what it means to be a person who gives birth, and maternal subjectivity. And I think that, I'll end on this. If we look at how the vulnerable are treated, it tells us a lot about our society. And there is something at the moment about these early years for people, and how difficult it can be for new parents, that can upend a lot of the myths and old ideas that our culture clings to. So from individualism, but also things like, I think we've got to a stage where we think we're in control of nature, and that we are, we can dominate it, and we've kind of, outgrown it almost in our kind of human hubris. But my experience of giving birth was it was like being face to face with mortality, the sublime, the violence of nature, and actually, and a more authentic kind of picture. And I wonder if that kind of bloody, gory, real, authentic experience was brought more into the light, we might grow a bit more respect for our earth, which I kind of think we could do with.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? Yes, how tied up it is with our understanding of ecology and the environment. And I think what is due as well, the way what we've learned, or some of us have learned, that looking at death and the process of death and grief and loss, and also sort of studying what ancient wisdom traditions have to say about life after death and so on, is hugely, there's an enormous resistance to that because it's kind of spooky and we don't want to think about it. But if we're not in denial about it and we can really look at it, there's a kind of real maturing and growing we can do, because it's this massive initiation that occurs that all of us are going to go through. And at the beginning of the incarnation process, you've got birth, exactly the same thing, this extraordinary incarnation into this world. And rather than in being in denial about it, or just sort of getting on with the job, and I think what you're saying is, yes, let's really look at it and see it in a systemic sense of how it affects us in all sorts of ways, and the science is fascinating. I mean, just that one piece you said there about how the baby leaves some of himself or herself behind in the mother is extraordinary and beautiful and terrifying and strange and one of the things that occurred to me just before we went on air with this, actually, I was thinking about talking with you and about your book and looking at the book and so on, and my thoughts went like this. There's and what you talk about in the book, the piece I read out, and you carry on in that piece about that sheer sort of wellspring of joy. They wake up in the morning and they're just bubbling with joy. And what I experience with all 4 children that I've had, and now with the grandchildren, is I'm confronted with a being who is just filled with joy. And of course, not when they've got a cold, when they're grumpy, when all the rest, but their natural state is joyful and loving, love and joy. And then I ask myself, how do I feel if I go to the core of my own being when I meditate, or when I just kind of center myself? That's what I find love and joy in my heart and in my center. And then you look at the mystics, and what do they say are the manifestations of the soul, the qualities of the soul? The soul is joyful and loving. So you say, we're onto something here. It's obviously something that's completely natural. If I still my mind through meditation or through listening to beautiful music or whatever, I come to a kind of wellspring of joy within. That feels completely natural. If I look at a baby, they're experiencing that too. So there's this connection between, if you like, the life of the soul and the life of the baby, and yet it would be a mistake to then say, well, in that case, it's easy, that the spiritual life is easy, or that looking after babies is easy, or that being a baby is easy, because in a sense, I suppose what I'm saying is to lead a spiritual life or to be in touch with oneself, I don't believe you need complicated ceremonies or to know about astrology or the tarot. I mean, they're all very interesting and they can be very helpful and all that. But basically, you don't need that. You just need to find a way of opening your heart, really, and connecting with your true self. And it's mannered, and you can see that within a baby. But that's not to be confused with ease, because the spiritual life, or leading your life from that center of joy and love, isn't easy. You don't just breeze through life loving everybody and being joyful all the time, because life just isn't. If only it was, but it's not. And likewise with babies, the fact that they're in contact with that doesn't mean to say life is easy. And one of the things that strikes me about little babies is, we've had our granddaughter living with us for 7 months, and this tiny little person kind of bursts into your life, and everything changes. There's stuff everywhere, and it's big. They're big people in an extraordinary way. So why did I say that? I've forgotten the link there, but I just wanted to I think maybe the connection is that what I hear in your book is that you're pointing to the joy. So it's not a gloomy book, although one of our daughters did say, and I noticed one review on Amazon did say something like, be careful about who you give this book to. And I don't know whether you agree with that, but tell me, do you agree with that? Do you think it's hard for some people to hear this? You should wait until your baby's 3 months old, 6 months old before you read the book, or do you think you should read it when you're pregnant?
It's a really interesting question, and I don't think I can really answer it, but I think when I was writing it and when it was just about to be published, I think I had a bit more fear about, for example, the birth chapter is very graphic, and wondered whether it should have a care warning. But actually, I've had so many readers who've read it in pregnancy, and who've read it kind of before having their first children, or who have liked it. And I think it depends on the person. I think that I hope it's a book that anyone could read. I suppose if if it's a person who's pregnant and very anxious about childbirth, that's definitely a consideration. However, I mean, my sense is that much of the information about childbirth is very limited, and I would have preferred to have more information about risk and birth injury and so on. So it's a tricky one. I think it depends on the individual.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And now, our daughter Sophia, up in Scotland, when she heard I was interviewing you, she loves your book as well, and she said it would be so interesting to ask Lucy. Your book Matrescence was a reflection on when you first became a mother. I understand you went on to have another 2 children. Does the transformation continue as you have more children? And if so, in what way? That's her question for you.
It's a great question. Thank you, Sophia. I reckon every mother, every parent would have a different answer to that. In terms of the science, my sense of it is that in the first experience of pregnancy and having a child, there is this drastic, huge change in the brain, which would happen subsequently, but perhaps not in such a dramatic way. But in terms of kind of transitions and thinking about life, my experience was that my first matrescence was a big shock. I could write notes, and I wrote much of this book while kind of pushing a pram and notes on my phone. But it was when my second child was born. This is very kind of personal, individual, because how can I speak otherwise? When I could start to kind of make sense of the institution of motherhood in our culture, I could read I could read more texts by like Adrienne Rich, the poet, who distinguished between the institution and the experience of motherhood, which is really helpful because it allows us to critique and analyze the institution, and also say the experience is, for me, abundant in joy and wonder and contentment, while the institution needs to be changed, and urgently in so many different ways. And I think, and my sense is from I write a bit about kind of Jungian perspectives, and I'm still very early in my experience of motherhood, but different children and their different ways of being can bring up different things in people. So I see a lot around me in my contemporaries who are very keen on kind of breaking intergenerational trauma and doing things differently, and perhaps might have had authoritarian childhoods and are very keen to bring up children so they can regulate their emotions and with respect and compassion and so on. And I think if you've got a child who is particularly explosive, as one of mine is, that can, and if you're a person who has been quite repressed emotionally, as I have been, that can bring up a lot of stuff. So I think it's very complicated, and
it's an interesting journey, isn't it? I think that's a really good point, that each child will be different and there'll be different challenges. And in some sense, I mean, my experience was in some senses it gets easier because, as each child arrives, there are more familiar things going on. But each child is absolutely unique and different. And so there are different challenges and different learnings, different relationships, and so on. Well, thank you, Lucy. Let me first of all paste into the comments links to various things. Lucy's written a great essay on modern Druidry called The Druid Renaissance, which is just fantastic. There's a link to that. There's a link to podcast from Motherkind, which is really great. You can find her book just by Googling Matrescence there, and you can find it. Also Emma Burke, my successor, interviewed you on her Fireside Chat the other day. So there's lots of material to dive into if this topic interests you. And let's have you on again. Thank you, Lucy, so much. Is there anything you wanted to say before we finish?
Just to thank you. It was amazing to talk to you and to be in this place with everyone. And yeah, just thank you very much.
There's a nice, I'll paste up here. There are all sorts of interesting comments coming through. It is something, Mari says, it's something to have these conversations between women, conversations between us now, and yet there is a need to be supported and supportive while we have them. Yes, thank you, Mari. So yes, do look at those links and connections that I've just pasted into the chat, and it's also under the show notes for the YouTube and Facebook thingamybobs. Okay, Lucy. Well, look, you have a good evening and many blessings, and thank you for writing that, and I look forward to the next book as well.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye, Lucy. Bye, everybody. Lots of love. See you all next week. Okay, bye.